There are going to be some positional battles during fall camp that are going to take over the storylines, period. Whether it's Jaxson Dart and Spencer Sanders or other positions as well. Also, Ole Miss got a commitment from a player from Tupelo, Mississippi, which is a rare thing. We'll let you know about that, show our work on it, and talk about everything that was going on. Anyway, stick around.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, or more importantly, Ole Miss every day. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and let's get started. So, I do want to let you know, we're going to start out with Jaxson Dart versus Spencer Sanders. That is the storyline that is going to go into fall. Now, I will say this before we get started. I do expect Jaxson Dart to win this job. I just do. That is where my prediction is. And I know certain people in the comments, I'm either a Jaxson Dart lover or a hater after every episode. So it kind of is what it is. But I do expect Jaxson Dart to win this job. But we need to pay attention to this position battle because it is a battle. Because Lane Kiffin has not necessarily named a starting quarterback. And there's still 15, 20 practices left to go before that decision has to be made. And if Jaxson Dart doesn't develop the holes in his game, which he was given a checklist in the offseason of things he needed to do, if he does not develop those, you can see exactly why they might go with Spencer Sanders in the future. But before we get started, I do want to let you see Jaxson Dart's zones. This is his passing zone. If you look outside the numbers, he performed pretty well. I mean, over 20 yards, he did not, he was probably 40% or less on all of those zones. But, outside at 20 yards, outside at 20 to the right, to the left at 20 yards, he had 90-ish, 95-ish NFL passer ratings. He was really good under 10 yards and really good behind the line of scrimmage. And I think that has become because he was developed in an air raid system, believe it or not, at USC for 1 year. So there's a lot of passes thrown short. We've seen exactly how that air raid looks. And even though Jaxson Dart wants to pump the ball downfield, you can see how he's effective at or behind the line of scrimmage. But if you look at those two middle zones, Jaxson Dart was 10 of 33, 446 yards in the middle deep part of the field, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks, 61 NFL passer rating. Now, if you look in the middle one, that is 10 to 20 yards. He was 27 of 56, under 50%. 510 yards, 3 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 60 NFL quarterback rating. This is whenever we talk about the middle of the field over and over again. This is what we're talking about. Now, we're not saying this is a fatal flaw in his game, but it is something that Lane Kiffin has to come up with something to mask that if he can't straighten it out, if he doesn't develop that going into this season. We saw them in the spring game throwing the balls to the running backs. There's certain things that they're doing to make linebackers move because the offense is more effective when that part of the field is thrown in more effectively. We'll see exactly what happens. Had Jake Crane on the show a couple months back, and he referred to Jaxson Dart as having linebacker blindness. I don't know if it's that serious. I just don't know if it's that serious. I think Jaxson Dart just really likes the big play. And he likes hitting the outside wide receiver, and he's comfortable there. So I think it's a comfort situation more than a can or can't situation. Now, let's look at Spencer Sanders' zones that you can see. It's not necessarily great. It's not a home run one over the other. Now, if you look outside the numbers in those short zones, Spencer Sanders is never going to win a passing contest with Jaxson Dart. And if you look at the deep middle, it's similar. But it was only 4 of 13, so he obviously doesn't like doing it. And he was 19 of 46, 410 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 2 picks. That's an 85 NFL passing record. This is the zone that passing-wise makes you think that this could happen. And we saw some passes in that area to Michael Trigg in the spring game. So we'll see exactly what happens. And the point is, if Jaxson Dart does not develop for whatever reason, let's say this fall camp is an extension of what happened last season, then the decision has to be made by Lane Kiffin. Do we want to do the air raid, or do we want a more mobile running quarterback back there with the number one running back in college football and these weapons on the outside that Spencer Sanders can make you hurt? He does have that ability. He's not as good of a passer as Jaxson Dart, but he doesn't have to be, because I think in that case you'll see more zone read, more of their Lane Kiffin triple option type stuff, where the first option is to the jet sweep and then the inside zone, and then the quarterback can keep it on a zone read. That's the Lane Kiffin triple option, I call it. But it'd be really interesting to see exactly what happens. Now, this is a situation to where I do think that this is a legit competition, but it's only a legit competition if Jaxson Dart doesn't develop. I think this competition will be completely based on Jaxson Dart moving forward. If he can develop those areas of his game, can be effective in that part of the field, use Caden Priestcorn, use Michael Trigg in the middle of the field, hit Trey Harris, hit Zachary Franklin. If he can do that, and this offense can become what I think it can become, this could be unbelievable special. And like I said, I predicted Jaxson Dart could potentially throw for 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns this season. That is on the table. Now, real quick, let's move on before we get into recruiting in these next segments a little bit. Let's talk about a couple other position battles that we need to keep an eye on. Victor Curne at left guard, the replacement for Nick Broker. Ole Miss has Quincy McGee, Victor Curne, and Bryson Sanders. I think those are three players that could factor into that. Now, like Preston Cushman, there's a lot of players that are going to fight for it, but that position is instantly. If Victor Curne can put it on lock, that's probably a best case scenario. But if it turns into a revolving door at that position, that could be problematic for the Ole Miss football team. It's interesting. This offensive line is good. I know whenever you look at it, it's like, well, the quarterback got hit. Yet a lot of that was on the quarterback. This offensive line run blocks every play. Whenever you run block, it's difficult to pass block. There's a reason that style was invented. So if the quarterback holds the ball longer on an RPO than he is supposed to do it, that is going to put the offensive line and make them look worse than they actually really are. Remember, this team was third in the nation in rushing and the highest non-service academy doing that. You don't do that just willy-nilly. So that is interesting. Also, we talked about Jaxson Dart getting the ball off his hands. He did that in the spring game. Obviously, pass protection was improved in the spring game. Now, real quick, the last position battle that I am going to pay attention to moving into fall. It's a three-man race that is going to be an absolute war. And I think they're going to rotate, but in this age of tempo, it could be a little bit tricky. So who is the first two out of three? And you have Cedric Johnson, Jared Ivey, and Isaac Ukwu. Now, if we saw yesterday, I talked about Isaac Ukwu having all SEC potential. And somebody mentioned in the comments that I think Cole Kublik said something that he might have disappeared in games in James Madison. And I think that is a little bit the fact that he was above that level and he could relax a little bit. And sometimes that bit him if you were running up in a situation like that. So I don't think that'll be the case in Oxford, Mississippi, where we'll see exactly what would happen. But Isaac Ukwu, Cedric Johnson, and Jared Ivey, all three have maximum pass rush levels. Probably whichever one, or whichever two, I should say, does better against the run is probably going to play more often than not. And I think this is a good battle as well. And last night we had a Ciante Seastrunk on the show. Another position battle to pay attention to is there's 5 players for 2 spots in the linebacker room. It's not even a 1 deep and a 2 deep at this point. You got 5 players that generally are competing for starting on the field every play, and all of them are doing well. If you want proof that they're doing well and Pete Golding likes where they are defensively, realize that in this late transfer portal window, not a single linebacker was recruited. Defensive line, secondary, yes. Not a single linebacker. He's happy where he is in that linebacker room. And we'll see exactly what happens there. And honestly, just throwing this out there, there's a 3 deep of FBS level cornerbacks that are in the secondary that we have no idea who is going to play. Just everywhere. There's people with FBS experience all over the place. It's going to be a mix and match. They're going to try and figure some stuff out. I think we should pay attention to that as well. Defensively, obviously Pete Golding was not happy with the defensive line and the secondary after spring. They were good, but he obviously worked to improve both of them. He did not do that in the linebacker room. Pretty interesting stuff if you ask me, honestly. I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook because new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 right now. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Now, I do realize that Mississippi is a brick and mortar type casino place, but if you go to the Tulane game, if you're in Louisiana, you can use FanDuel. If you're in Tennessee, you can use FanDuel. So it is possible, especially with the people that are living near borders in Mississippi. So realize that you can get your no sweat first bet there. Use it whenever you go to Memphis or whenever you leave the state line. Heck, if you go to Delta, Louisiana, you can use it. So don't miss out on your chance to claim that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, it's an official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks are used with permission. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And my everydayers, tomorrow on the show, we're going to continue to go down this road of preparing for what should be a monumental season in Ole Miss football. I'm excited. You should be excited. And if you like being excited, listen to me. That's all I'm saying. I'm not a bound of energy, but I do like talking about Ole Miss sports, and I'm always fairly excited about it. So Ole Miss got another commitment, and his name was, Shamaar Darden. And here's his profile from On3. And I put this up there because it had all four recruiting services on the screen. Shamaar Darden. He's a 6'1", 170-pound cornerback from Tupelo, Mississippi. First of all, if this kid's even a borderline player and you can go commit a player in Tupelo High School, Ole Miss has not had success in Tupelo, you do it, honestly. Now, I don't know which board it was on, okay? But somebody brought to my attention, somebody on the board said that this guy was an alpha-type player on a Tupelo defense that was pretty good. So I am interested to see exactly what he is like and what he can do. We're going to break down his highlights in the third segment, but just to let everybody know, when you see something like this, the one thing you need to recognize is that he hasn't been rated. Now, Shannon Terry, whenever I worked for Rivals, he was the head of Rivals, and he went on to create 247 and probably instituted policies there, and now has created On3. Okay, so he's probably instituted policies there. So I'm probably not talking out of school whenever I say this. When I was at Rivals and a player committed to a Power 5 school, he got 3 stars. Period. That was the baseline. There's no such thing as a 2-star Power 5 player. Okay? And there certainly are not unrated players unless they've been unrated. They try to star every player. So that's the first thing you can take from this. On3, ESPN, and Rivals haven't rated this player. Now, why is that? Okay? Why has this player not been rated? Because common sense would tell people if this was a good player, he would have been rated. But I think it's important to know, and this is an extreme example of it, but Chris Jones was a low 3-star, until the Mississippi-Alabama game and the Under Armour All-American game where he became the second or third player in the country. My point is Mississippi is a difficult place to recruit. And there's not many people that are involved in rating these players to where they can actually sit down and break them down. They count on things like combines and camps and things like that. There's a player that just committed to Mississippi State as well that is going through a similar type situation. So whenever you see that, especially in the state of Mississippi, don't flip out and automatically assume this isn't a good player. That would be just foolhardy. Now, another thing, whenever you look at this, Pete Golding joined the staff at Ole Miss on January 13th. And there's a reason I'm saying this, okay? On January 13th, Pete Golding joined the Ole Miss staff. Now, if you look at Shamaar Darden's timeline, he received an Ole Miss offer on January 29th. He was one of the first players that Pete Golding offered. The question is, why? Now, without seeing this player on the field, now we're going to break down his film. He is a good football player. I think what has happened is he is not camping. And other than going to maybe the Ole Miss camp, he's just not out there. And people want stuff like that because they see somebody that is not necessarily ranked and they make assumptions. And I think Ole Miss might have got this guy to Oxford. I do not know. But it feels like him committing in June. Because for people that don't know, June is camp month. And just like 2019, a lot of players get offers and real offers when Ole Miss can see him live and work him out and do their measurements and are not at the whim of a scouting service like 247 On 3 or Rivals or ESPN. So my point is in all of this, and I believe it or not, I do have a point. I'm not saying this kid has a chance to be, Mike Hilton. Although some of the story that I've heard goes a little bit like the Mike Hilton story. I'm not saying he's going to do it, but that story is there. Ole Miss has the benefit of recruiting somebody from Tupelo High School that is going to help them down the road. We have had all kinds of trouble recruiting Tupelo. And this kid, if Pete Golding offered him in his first week or two at Ole Miss, that means he was probably on the list to watch at Alabama. And Alabama, just so everybody's clear, their player personnel department is top notch. The reason that Alabama has been so good over the last 10 years is because even when they go back down and get a 3-star player, which Alabama does, that's a kind of a dirty secret. Everybody's like Alabama recruits nothing but 5 stars. No, even when they go down to a 3-star, it's somebody like Josh Jacobs. Somebody that can really rise up because of what they believe. And I think Shamaar Darden might have been on that list at Alabama of somebody to pay attention to. Now, we're going to talk in the next segment about Shamaar and his highlights. And we're going to look at him and we're going to watch him and we're going to try and break it down. This player moves like the best player on the field. And as I've told you many times, that one of the things that I looked at whenever I was at Rivals is this high school player the best player on the field? Because there's very few exceptions to where that rule doesn't apply. And he was the best player on the field. He was the most athletic player on the field. He was the alpha dog on that field. I saw that with my own eyes. So we'll break down his film when we come back. Stick around. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers, we're going to continue our march towards media days. These are still the 2 most difficult weeks of the year. We're growing, we're expanding. Ashante Seastrunk interview is on the site last night. He did a fantastic job. Andy Jaffe a couple of days ago as well, and I'm going to continue to work on that, especially over the course of the next month. And then once media days happen, boom, this all gets real easy then. We do our shows about 3 things we learned from the weekend, keys versus whoever we're playing, why Ole Miss is going to win. It's all in the can. We did it last year. If you're familiar with what we did last year, we're going to do the same type stuff this year. We're also going to look on how we can do pregame and postgame type shows as well when it comes to Ole Miss football this fall. So it should be a lot of fun. Anyway, just want to let you know real quick to join the Grove Collective if you have not. No amount of money is too much money. We have Walker Jones on the show on Saturday. He can help you out. So donate to the Grove Collective. Here, let me put up on the website for anybody that's interested in it, thegrovecollective.com, and they can take you out. I think it's a $20 a month membership, and you can be a member of the collective, and you can help those guys out as well. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, Shamaar Darden committed to Ole Miss, and this is a good get for the Rebels. And whenever you look at exactly what he can do as a defensive back, kind of fits the mold that we've seen the last couple of days. Anthony Robinson, Andy Jaffe, they're all similar type defensive backs. And if they can all play, and if they all really hit, which they don't, even 5 stars don't hit. That's the dirty secret that people don't tell you. When Ole Miss got 3 5 stars in 2013, Robert Kimdichie, Laquan Treadwell, and Laramie Tunsil. The number 1 player in the country was Robert Kimdichie. He flamed out of the NFL. Good college player. I'm not saying he wasn't, but he flamed out of the NFL. And then you look at Laramie Tunsil, absolute hit in the NFL. He's one of the highest paid left tackles in the NFL. And then you have Laquan Treadwell, who's just been desperately trying to hold on. That's 5 stars. I think from that same class, you had Evan Ingram and Mike Hilton, which I might be off by a year or something like that. That's 2 3 stars that hit. So look at the stars, right? Obviously pay attention to them, because the way this works is the top 100 players in the country, everybody can evaluate. I could pull my wife into the room and show her the top 100 players in the country, and she could have, oh yeah, that is a good football player. But when you get to the low 4 stars and the upper 3 stars, you're talking about 1,500 kids that are within a whisker of each other, and it's all about system and fit. Everything becomes about system and fit. It's the reason Army and Navy and those schools run the offense they do, because they require a different type of athlete that they can get. This athlete might be rated as a 2-star, but in their system, it's somebody that can be very, very effective that otherwise they would not be willing to get, they would not be able to get. So it's all about system and fit. So looking at Shamaar Darden, like I said, really, really good football player. And something that people should pay attention to when looking at his highlights is how smooth he runs. If you look at him running, it's almost effortless. And he is a super physical safety. Like I said, there's a lot of things that remind you of Mike Hilton. Okay? He's a little bit taller than Mike was, because Mike was like 5'8", 5'9". But he can run really well. He's really physical, and he's hyper aggressive. Those are 3 things that are always good for any player that you sign. Now, like most high school players, you do want to see him work on his ball skills at some level. And if he does that, the sky's the limit for this guy, because he has physical attributes that could translate up. To put this in terms that people might understand, yes, he is a 3-star player right now, but he's a high ceiling 3-star player. He's not a 3-star player that is Austin P worthy, Jacksonville State worthy. He's that guy that they try to get that nobody else knows about, because they realize that somebody could be on their hands that makes a play. I mean, you look at him run, it looks so easy, so fluid running the ball. He's very physical. He honestly, he's 6'1", 6'2", 170. I think they might try and redshirt him and put him in at strong safety. When you look at this guy, I could see him playing football at 215, playing strong safety and being an absolute menace. As long as he doesn't lose his speed doing that. Because he is very good against the run. He's very good in the open field, and he's an extremely fluid athlete. That is my opinion whenever I look at this player. Now, he does need to work on his ball skills a little bit. He absolutely does need to do that. But against the run, this guy's there. He's got the he's going to come in. He's the type guy that you'll hear about when he gets there in the spring or in the fall, whenever it's like, this guy's flashing. He's probably not going to play, but he's flashing. And he's making others better because of the way he's flashing and raising the level. Because you've got a situation right now. I did an episode, what was it, 3 weeks back, about how I was concerned about the safety room. And in a week, Andy Jaffe commits, Anthony Robinson commits, and now Shamaar Darden commits. And you can see that they're trying to restock the personnel in that room with players that can play via the transfer portal and in recruiting. So it's going to be very interesting to see what all happens. So thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Every day or tomorrow on the show, John Macon Gillespie from the Grove Report is going to be on to talk about some different off-season stuff. You know, with the MLB draft coming up, we might talk a little Jacob Gonzalez. And apparently Knox Kiffin is taking after his dad out on the road. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Should be a fun. Thank you very much for stopping by today. Tomorrow, stop in again. We'll do it all again, just like we always do, because it's Ole Miss every day. Anyway, see you tomorrow.